So I think we're going to get going. We have quite a few people on the line, so I'm glad you could all join us today to talk about best practices for solar and storage permitting. My name is Catherine Rushton. I'm the Renewable Energy Program Director with CLEER, and we're joined today by a couple of other panelists. We have Janet Alois here. She's the Community Development Director for the town of Silt, and she's going to provide some perspective on updating permitting processes using the SolSmart program. And then we also have Mike Steiner. He's Key Accounts Specialist with Holy Cross, and he's going to be talking about new programs from Holy Cross and how local governments can help them be successful. And so to start out, I'm going to be providing some context for this webinar with a brief overview of the Western Colorado Clean Energy Network, regional initiative that's funded by DOLA. And then I'll give an overview of the SolSmart program and how this tool can be used for streamlining solar permitting. And then there's going to be ample opportunity at the end for questions. So if you note at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A section. And so you can be putting questions there as you're listening to the presentations throughout. Great. Okay, Maisa, next slide, please. So the Western Colorado Clean Energy Network, this is an informal collaboration between nonprofit and civic organizations, local governments, and other partners, all working together for greater regional resilience around areas of shared common purpose relating to clean energy. So these areas include renewable energy, clean transportation, and efficient buildings and infrastructure. Next slide. The first project of the network involves a 3-county collaboration between Garfield, Eagle, and Pitkin counties. And the communities and utility companies in this region have a variety of goals and targets relating to clean energy. And by working together as a region, we can make greater progress in reaching these goals in ways that directly improve our region's resilience and economic diversification, and then really do our part to help Colorado reach that overall goal of 100% renewable energy by 2040. We want to do this in ways that maximize community, environmental, and economic benefits. Next slide. So back in February of 2019, many of you will recall attending a workshop led by NREL and RMI, and this was part of the Solar Energy Innovation Network. And so together we followed a process that led to identifying some actions that could be taken across the region around clean energy initiatives. Next slide. So many of the identified actions from that meeting were renewable energy focused. And so then when the Department of Local Affairs released the Renewable and Clean Energy Challenge Permitting Grant Opportunity, CLEER and CORE and the Climate Action Collaborative in Eagle worked together to submit an application for the region. And the initiative received funding. And as you can see on the slide, there's 4 areas that we're going to be working on under this initiative. And one of those is streamlining permitting processes. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Next slide. So actually, before we really dive into the SolSmart program, we'd like to get your input on a couple of questions. So we've got a couple of polling questions, and we really want to get a feel for your familiarity with SolSmart and how we can best support you moving forward. But the first thing we want to know about is really your experience. So what is the average length of time it takes you to issue a solar permit? We see a large variety throughout the region. You can actually click directly on your screen to vote. And then Maisa, when you feel like maybe you've got enough people, you can just show us the answers. So Maisa, do you want to go ahead and see if we can see the answers? Oh, here we go. So I know there's people on the call maybe that aren't actually directly involved with permitting, and so we have quite a few I don't knows, and then it looks like it's pretty much across the board. And yeah, please go ahead and feel like you can put other information in the chat box. Mitch says that it depends on the complexity. Okay, so next question. So we know that there probably are other issues. These are things that we've heard from jurisdictions in our region. And so if you do have other, feel free to put those in the chat box. But do you see any of these issues that are leading to longer permitting times? And I think you can check more than one, hopefully. Okay, so there's a large percentage of applications that do not have all the necessary documents, and I can see that that can lead to a lot of unnecessary staff time in chasing those down. And then a lot of people said other, so it'd be really interesting for us to hear, you know, what those things are. Maybe we can talk about that more at the end. Okay, so I think we've got one more question. So I imagine most of you have heard of SolSmart, but we'd like to know just how much experience people already have. Okay, great. So most of you have heard of it, but don't know more. So I guess we'll dive into the presentation and then we'll all know more. So what is SolSmart? Well, in essence, it's a no-cost technical assistance program to help communities reduce soft costs related to permitting. And so the program, actually, sorry, next slide. The program provides examples and best practices, but it also has a lot of flexibility. So it leaves a lot of room for choice in what actions make sense for a particular community. And we found that many communities already have some best practices in place. And so maybe you only have to implement a couple more actions to receive a designation. And you can choose to just do the basics, or you can, you know, go for gold by taking a lot of the actions and starting to really promote solar and storage technologies. So yeah, next slide. SolSmart actions. So what are the key actions? There are several. So transparency. It really makes sense to not make people hunt for the information they need, because if they can't find it really quickly on your website, then they're going to call you to ask, and that's going to take up a lot of your time. And then providing training. You know, I've been involved in solar for many years, and it's always changing and evolving. And especially now that we're anticipating an increase in residential storage systems, there's always something new to learn. And a lot of the staff at towns have never received any education on best practices for solar and storage permitting. And the learning through SolSmart is very accessible. They have 1 to 1.5 hour webinars, and they're packed full of useful information. And then reducing barriers. It says here that, you know, codify solar PV as a by right accessory use. You don't actually have to do that, but, you know, at least review what is in the zoning code. The Solar Foundation are available to provide this service to us, and they would suggest a range of changes. And so you could choose the most permissive or the least permissive. But really you can implement what makes most sense for your community. Next slide. So why participate? Well, increasing transparency makes it easier for homeowners and business owners and solar installers to navigate the permitting process, which in turn is helpful for growing the solar market in your area. And that's great for supporting clean energy jobs, which is an important aspect of our regional economy. And then, of course, increased efficiency is also beneficial in reducing staff time spent on fielding inquiries regarding permits. Next slide. So SolSmart has several designation pathways, and we're mostly going to be talking about the standard pathway. That's what the vast majority of communities use to proceed with SolSmart. I do just want to touch briefly on the modified pathway, and so that's also referred to as the county pathway. And they have this because some communities do not control permitting, or they don't control planning and zoning, or maybe they don't do the inspections and control those inspection processes within their jurisdiction. And so if you use the modified pathway, there's a different set of actions that you can take to get a designation, but you're still helping support the local solar market. Next slide. So there are 3 different designation levels: bronze, silver, and gold. And for each level, there's a point threshold that needs to be reached. And then there's some prerequisites that need to be completed. Next slide. So SolSmart uses objective criteria to measure local government progress towards creating a solar-friendly community. And so in the foundational categories, and that's permitting and planning, zoning, and development regulations, so you have to get credits within those categories. But then beyond that, you have a lot of flexibility to choose actions within the 6 special focus categories. There are actually, in the program, there are 95 different choices of actions that you can take. And obviously, you're not expected to take all of them, but it does provide a lot of flexibility and choice. And so many communities will already have some of these action items in place, and maybe they only need to take a few more to get a basic designation. So each credit or action has a corresponding point value, ranging from 5 to 20 points for that specific action. And so for each designation level, you have to get a certain number of points, but you get to decide what works best for your community and which actions are most suitable in helping achieve your goals. Next slide. So there are some prerequisite credits that you have to achieve, and we don't need to talk about everything on the list right now, but I do want to touch on the highlighted ones just briefly. So really, you start out in the program by providing this solar statement, and the solar statement just indicates the community's commitment to implementing best practices for permitting and potentially earning a SolSmart designation. And then the second one, P1, the online checklist, this makes a lot of sense whether you want a SolSmart designation or not. It makes the permitting process clearly transparent, very accessible for a homeowner or a business or a solar installer to be able to see exactly what the requirements are. And then the PZD1A, the zoning review requirement. This is a review of zoning ordinances and a memo that is then presented to the local government. And it's purely an informational memo that identifies barriers to solar energy in the zoning ordinance or the land use ordinance. And there's no obligation to act on the memo, but we currently have the opportunity to have the review and the memo prepared by the technical advisors at the Solar Foundation who run the SolSmart program. So I do recommend taking advantage of that opportunity within the next couple of months. Next slide. So as you go through the application scorecard, and it's easily accessible through an online portal, you have to sign up and get a login. But you can use this tool to baseline where your community currently stands on having best practice policies in place. And then you can also access a lot of examples and helpful materials that will help you both choose and complete some of the actions. Next slide. So resources, there are tons of great resources on the SolSmart website. And in particular, you can find webinars on a variety of solar-related topics. And note that several of them can count towards the continuing education requirements that provide points within the SolSmart program. And so those are a pretty quick and simple way to work towards a designation. Next slide. technical support. So what I'm really here to let you know today is that you have access to local expertise and support to navigate the SolSmart process. And so we're encouraging you to reach out to your local energy nonprofit for technical assistance. And you can see on the slide that we have a dedicated and outreach person to each county. So you can contact that person depending on what county you're in, or you can contact CLEER or CORE or the Climate Action Collaborative, and obviously we would connect you with the right person. So as you can see from the SolSmart map, SILT have achieved SolSmart Gold. And so next we're going to hear from Janet Alois at the town of SILT about her experience with the SolSmart program.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for allowing me to represent the town of SILT to speak about the town's experience with the SolSmart program and specifically the solar permitting application process that we have here. I really look forward to talking with some of you even outside of this webinar in case you have questions about what we did. Next slide, please. So we received a gold level designation just recently, and really what this designation means to us is that we have a commitment to be environmentally responsible. We have a responsibility as well to be efficient and effective in our solar application processing. And we offer as an economic development tool for those who claim that the environmental sustainability is one of their #1 goals. We offer this as a way to show that we agree with them and we'd like to have them in our town. Next slide, please. So we did amend our municipal code a little bit in order to make it very clear what a solar applicant would need to do. We also wanted to encourage both on residential and commercial buildings, and so we changed our code with respect to height on the dwelling or on the roof structure, and we also allowed for a ground-mounted solar, which we hadn't previously had before. But specifically with respect to the permitting, we wanted to make sure that we could issue permits within 3 days of application, that the application was very simple and very straightforward. We also wanted to make sure that we could inspect a solar installation within 2 days. And we wanted to make sure that there were only 2 inspections per job. This can be a little bit challenging for the larger projects, but we're committed to making sure that there isn't much downtime for the installers. They are wanting to get in and get out of a job because they're busy and because time is money. And so we recognize that and we get right out there as soon as they call. Obviously, 48 hours for an inspection request is not a terrible wait period, but we do recognize that even if we can get to them in 24 hours, it's much better. We also wanted to make sure that we cap the fee at $50. That's really important. And we recognize that there are taxes we cannot collect on solar installations. So we've made sure that that's very clear to our staff and to our customers. Next slide, please. So we sent out this flyer to all of the businesses and to many organizations, and we have these flyers at Town Hall and at the library. I know with social distancing and the closure of these buildings, we haven't given out as many lately, but we've printed over 500 over the course of the last 9 months. So we feel like we're getting the message out and people are very excited about this program. We also underwent significant training to make sure that we could answer the questions that the installers had and the questions that the citizens had, so that the review is very smooth and there isn't any lack of understanding between us. Next slide, please. The town also updated its application, or excuse me, our website. And Garfield Clean Energy and Catherine Russian were instrumental in helping us display what we wanted on our website and explaining to the citizens with links to both GCE and to CLEER, as well as to the state website, and having the checklist and having the applications online. We also wanted to make sure that we promoted, so we've been using that page as a link onto Facebook and Instagram, just so that people can really get to know us, and they can just go onto a link very quickly and understand what the town of Silt offers. We also are heavily committed as a community, putting solar in our town hall, our water wastewater plant, and the Silt Library all have solar. So we kind of want to model exactly what we're promoting here. And the SolSmart designation really helped us to do that. So to that end, I'd just like to say how very thankful the town is to CLEER and to Garfield Clean Energy for really helping us to understand how important this is to get the message out, but also how important it is to work with our installers and our citizens to put solar on rooftops and on ground-mounted systems to really help with our own sustainability. And again, I would thank you for being part of this group, and I would answer any questions either through chat or afterwards by phone or email.
Great, thank you so much, Janet. So next up, we are going to be hearing from Mike Steiner. He's going to be telling us about Holy Cross's residential battery energy storage system pilot program.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. And I've got Chris Bilby is also on the call to answer any questions. He's our research engineer. So, Maisa, if you could go to the next slide. So, I think many of you attended, at least in the Roaring Fork Valley, and I know there was a lot of representatives for the resiliency workshop. That was a result of the 2018 4th of July Lake Christine fire. And as many of you know, 3 out of our 4 poles were inoperable. And if we would have lost that 4th pole, from Basalt or distribution substation Basalt down to Aspen would have been out of power for days or even longer. So really in both valleys in our service territory, wildfires have become more prevalent, and it's caused a lot of concerns. So our role in the workshop was to think creatively with our stakeholders, and we needed to come up with solutions for resiliency for our system and our members. So go ahead and next slide. So initiatives came out of the workshop, and one was to partner with our communities, our jurisdictions, to develop backup power solutions, and particularly with non-carbon emitting resources. We needed to provide value for our members for blue sky days like we're having right now, where we can provide some value for having a battery or backup system, and that could be as giving our members value for a peak reduction if we're allowed to control that battery and discharge it, if they would give us controls, optional for the members. And then of course during black sky events, when we have an outage on our system or we have an event like Lake Christine, it would provide resiliency for the members to keep the power on. So really we're trying to work with jurisdictions to really understand the permitting process. Batteries are new to us. They've come a long way from technology and become economic for deployment. And so we tried to find solutions to make minimal financial impact for our members. And so Chris and our power supply group have really investigated that since the workshop, and we've made it, we feel we've made it economic for our members to deploy these systems. And so Chris and our engineering department are investigating options for batteries. And go ahead to the next slide, please. And so we've come up with our battery energy storage system, BEST program. We've responded for the need of resiliency with, this is indicative for now, and our board just approved piloting this program. And starting this summer, we're going to pilot with 15, maybe 20 different members to deploy these batteries. And we're in discussion with Tesla to provide a 13.5 kilowatt hour residential battery. And it would be a 5 kW system per unit, and we could provide 1 to 5 per household. And so we're going to begin piloting these to understand kind of the control capabilities, signaling with Holy Cross Energy, keeping it optional for the member to allow us to control during those peak events. We've got very ambitious goals. And so kind of the purpose of this call, one of the many purposes of this call for us, was to make our jurisdictions aware that this is coming and we would need help in hopefully streamlining this permitting process to the best of everybody's ability, because our goal is to deploy 1,000 residential batteries within 2 years of the full-scale program rollout. We'd anticipate the program rolling out the program for all residential members in early 21. And so what we've done for the costs is we've had this for a lot of our car chargers and other distributed energy resources program to help members with the cost of installation, which allows members to finance that cost for 10 years. And that comes to a really minimal, relatively, to have a battery in your home, roughly $30 a month. So we have discounts if members enroll and give us control for our distribution flexibility tariff to allow us to discharge that battery during peak events. Maisa, next slide, please. So the benefits are obvious, during our power outages, though most are short in duration. We rarely see outages lasting more than an hour, but it gives our members ability to island during that time. By controlling these batteries, it helps our power supply costs by curbing those peak demand charges that we incur on a monthly basis. And as a lot of you are aware, we have very ambitious renewable goals. And so when we get into oversupply conditions, the wind is blowing, we have too much wind or too much solar, we can help discharge and mitigate that oversupply by discharging the batteries. And these are designed to be affordable. And like I said, with $30 a month, we make these affordable for our members. So the initial rollout, like I said, is in 2021. And, I think thereafter we're gonna come up with more of a commercial battery program, hopefully in the later in the year in 21 in that time frame. Next slide, Maisa, please. So here's kind of our ask for jurisdictions. And, Catherine, Janet kind of alluded to is really streamlining this guidance for permitting. And if we can make our members aware and have some transparency and clarity on the process without making it too onerous on our jurisdictions, so they can understand this process and how they can get battery solar deployed and streamlined relatively quickly. This is going to help us achieve really that flexible system, and resiliency is such a big part of our territory. And, with weather conditions and events that happen, we feel like this will be really make our system resilient from the residential meter on up. And as a lot of our jurisdictions have clean energy targets, we do too. And this will help us procure and in our power supply content more renewables. So yeah, I think that's all I got, and Chris and I are happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. So so you can see at the bottom of the screen, we have the Q&A box. That's probably the best place to put questions. I see someone's already put a question in chat. That's fine too. So I'll just give you a couple minutes to think about things that you might want to ask Janet or Mike about the Holy Cross programs, or questions about SolSmart in general. Before we go on to the Q&A section, we do want to ask you a couple more questions. So Maisa, could you pull up the next polling question, please? Okay, so having heard some information today, we just like to know if you have some interest in some follow-up in your jurisdiction to talk about solar permitting processes. Okay, great. So we've got a mix of results. It looks like a lot of people would like to have some follow-up, but it's also totally applicable to just go ahead and do this by yourselves. And, there's a lot of great ideas in the SolSmart program, but you could use them and not necessarily go for a designation, and that's fine too. Do we have one more question, Maisa? Right, so, maybe you are not necessarily wanting to use the SolSmart program, but you could still have this memo prepared, which would give you some good information to consider. Okay, great. So we can totally follow up with individuals and discuss and provide more info, so you can consider that one. So let's go ahead and look to see what questions we have. I'm just gonna pull up the Q&A section. So one of the questions, what if your energy provider is, I think this is supposed to be Excel. And so I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Excel, I think, are preparing also some energy storage programming. I believe the PUC have asked them to come up with a storage, some kind of storage program to propose to the PUC within the next 90 days. So we'll have more information about what Excel are doing in terms of storage, if that's what that question was about. And if not, then you can type more in the box. So I think we have a question for Mike. So Mike,
Yep.
James wants to know, what do the batteries look like and how big are they?
Yeah, this is a question that's come up from our initial conversations with jurisdictions. And Chris, jump in if I'm getting this wrong. I'll give you kind of an estimate. I think you're looking, James, for the actual physical size. So it's about 3 feet width, and I think about 4 feet length. And they're installed indoor garage in that setting, indoor setting. And they're pretty heavy. They're a couple hundred pounds in terms of the size, and they're the Tesla 5 kW Powerwall.
Okay, so another question for Mike and maybe also Chris. Have there been efforts to integrate battery grid storage with electric vehicles, such as school buses or personal vehicles?
Hey, Chris, are you on? You want me to take that, or?
Oh, I'll take that. Yeah, so we are working on that on 2 different levels. We're looking at integrating battery storage with DC-FC chargers in the next couple of years. The Colorado Energy Office actually might have a grant program with that to try to mitigate demand charges. And then we also are working and reviewing some of the specifications on what's known as V2G, so vehicle to grid, where a school bus or a vehicle could discharge back into the grid. There's a lot of standards like IEEE and ISO standards that need to be accomplished. And I wouldn't imagine that we'll be able to discharge from a vehicle to the grid in the next 5 years. So hence the residential storage program. But hopefully at some point we can take a school bus to an emergency zone and be able to use that as a power source as opposed to using a diesel generator.
And Chris, John Gitchell had a question too. If you want to take it, or I can. Is what do you see the benefit for homeowners to participate?
Yeah, I think it's bifold. The number one benefit for the member is going to be a resilience application. Just like we had some storms go through here the last couple days. This would keep the power on at your house and allow you to ride through that without even seeing a blink. The other benefit is just going to be, participating in the membership as a whole. If you allow Holy Cross to site one of these assets inside your home, not only could you decrease our overall power supply costs for the whole membership, but you could also allow us to add more renewable integration and take that daytime PV that you're generating on your roof and push it to the evening hours when we need it to supply some heating for another home.
Mike, I see one more question here in chat. So Fi's wondering how you're going to qualify the pilot members. How are you going to select who gets to participate in the pilot program?
Yeah, we're and Chris, jump in, but we're kind of investigating that now. Like I said, we just got board approval yesterday for the pilot program. So it's going to be based on location, and
yeah, the power walls will need to be installed by a certified Tesla installer.
Right.
There's 3 in the state of Colorado. One actually happens to be in our territory. Part of the pilot's to understand the actual cost. So when we say it's $30 a month, that we're pretty firm on that cost, and that's what the 6 are supposed to prove out. So we'll be spreading those across our territory. So preferably one in the Eagle Vale Valley, one in the Roaring Fork Valley, and maybe one in the Western District out towards Batterland Mesa.
Well, great. Well, thank you, everybody. It looks like we don't have any more questions right now. You're welcome to contact any of the panelists after the fact if you think of other things you want to ask them about. We are going to send out a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. So if you wanted to share the information with anybody else within your jurisdiction, you should get that in the next couple days. And then meanwhile, we have the results from the polling questions. So we will be following up with any of you that said that you are interested in learning more about SolSmart, maybe pursuing a designation, or in getting a zoning review and memo from the Solar Foundation. So unless anybody else has anything they want to talk about, Mike, Chris, Janet, thank you very much for your presentations. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I think we'll leave it there.